Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Reruns. Now let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Illuminating the Dark Fields. Edward Mora's thrilling new dive into the human psyche. Be enlightened with Illuminating the Dark Fields. Welcome everyone to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers, of course, and we like to use what we've learned on set and in creating projects to analyze and look at films and review them, as well as just, people who love stories and storytelling. And it's amazing to me how different a movie can be based on the environment you're watching it. Like, you could have watched the same movie 1,000 times and you tweak a few settings and suddenly you're in a different world. Like I just went yesterday, I went to the movie theater to see Before Sunrise, and I've never seen it in a theater before. And I've seen it 1,000 times. Like, just, one of my formative movies that I saw as a teenager. And I was like, yeah, I'll go watch it. And so I get in there, and it's at the Austin Film Society. So this is one of like a bunch of filmmakers here locally, like Linkletter himself, right, is kind of a founding member of the Austin Film Society. And this is a Linkletter film. And therefore there's a different level. It became a cult classic. It's not one that hit theaters in 1995 and just blew up, right? This is one that kind of gained steam over time. And so here we are 30 years later, which is crazy. And now it's gained all this cult following, and now you're going to show it in a theater, in the house that Linkletter built, so to speak. And then he gives an introduction, to it. He's not there, but he recorded one. And I'm surrounded by 300-400 people who love this movie just as much as I do. And it comes on and I'm like, okay, yeah, I know these beats. And suddenly there's like, this isn't a funny laugh out loud movie. Like, I've watched it and I don't know if I've ever laughed out loud watching this movie before, but suddenly all these little mannerisms, all these little quirks, all this joy kind of bubbles up in the audience. And it really was like the first time I've seen it. It was like suddenly things that I appreciated, I'm finding a whole other gear of enjoyment. And I'm laughing, like I'm just laughing at these little moments that it probably would have been a weird experience if you'd never seen the movie before. I can't imagine what watching it there would have been like, because we're laughing at things that aren't necessarily laugh out loud funny, but in that environment, it really is like, oh, you know what? That actually is really hilarious. Like all the little looks, all the little jabs. And I'm hearing things I've never heard before. Like they get off the train. So at the beginning of this movie, this guy talks this girl off the train and into spending the day with them because he's about to leave Europe and come back to America, and she's on her way to Paris. And he's like, hey, let's just hang out for a day. And she's like, you know what? Okay. And they get off the train, and there's this moment, and it's kind of awkward as they were just so clicking on the train, and now they're not clicking anymore. And it's like, what's going on? And they're walking across this bridge, and his brilliant observation is, it's a nice bridge. It's like, it's not a nice bridge. It's fine. It's a fine bridge. But it just killed me. Suddenly I'm like, that's freaking hilarious. And there's all these little moments, and it was overwhelming. I almost left the theater like 4 or 5 times where I was like, I don't think I can handle this. Like, it's just too much. Like the emotional aspect for me of watching this in this environment. And then like, I really was overwhelmed for the first half of the movie before I finally kind of settled in. And it was so cool because it's one of those things. I almost didn't do it. I almost didn't watch the film. I was just like, I've seen that a million times. I don't need to go see it in the movie theater. And I just don't generally do that a lot. Like Alamo Drafthouse is amazing at playing old movies. And I've done that 2 or 3 times over the last, 20 some odd years of going to the Drafthouse. And each time has been really fun. but I like going and seeing new stuff at the theater. Like that's just kind of my jam. And now after having seen Before Sunrise, I was like, maybe the other element that I'm missing, because I've seen two other classics, at a draft house. I saw Spirited Away, which was great, an amazing experience to see that in theater. And I'd also seen The Three Amigos, which is a really fun experience too. But I was just like, Spirited Away was seminal, like that's iconic, like that deserves to be seen on the big screen. I don't know that Before Sunrise deserves to be seen on the big screen, but now that I realize seeing it at the Austin Film Society, surrounded by movie nerds who are going to respect the film and be completely invested in it in a way that is adoration, is like, okay, I need to go back to the Link, is what they call it, that theater for these kinds of experiences more often, because it was just a completely game-changing event. And that's such a cool aspect of movies and storytelling, but specifically just connecting with an audience in the right way whenever going in, this is going to be the right audience for this movie. That's a really cool thing. I don't think I understood, in which is a funny thing for me to say out loud, how different watching a movie in a theater can actually be. Whenever I already knew that, I knew that, but this is a whole other experience of a movie that I knew, surrounded by people who also know.
Do you think that maybe it was because you knew the movie that you had that experience? Like, that sounds like a stupid question, but if you go see a movie that you haven't seen before, or maybe you saw once, but it's been a long, long time and you don't have a familiarity with it and everybody's laughing, you're just kind of like, okay, this is an experience, right? I'm laughing because maybe I wouldn't laugh if 200 other people weren't laughing, but because they are, it is infectious, and I get it because they get it, and now I'm looking at it through a different lens because other people are laughing. But because you've seen this movie so many times and you love it, right? But you haven't seen it in that setting before with all of those people around, it's like almost transforming your view of these lines. And then also, you mentioned that moment where, they get off the train and there's like, they've lost this connection a little bit. It feels like an homage to, like The Graduate or something, like the ending of The Graduate. and so it's almost like a history buffs movie in a way. And also, but then an extension of that, because we kind of end with The Graduate, and here we're almost beginning, right? And now we there's like a roadmap that it's leading us on. But maybe it's because you knew the movie really well and you expected a certain thing, and then you go in and you get this whole other experience. So maybe that's a suggestion to go see movies that you like in the theater that you have seen before many times.
Absolutely. I think you're dead on. Like, I think there is an aspect of like the infectiousness of laughter, along with permission to laugh. But I think while you were talking, the other thing that I learned about my experience was that the audience taught me something that I didn't know about the movie, which is that it's actually funny. I had never saw that before. I only saw the interesting conversations and the deep, deeply connected and realized characters. The performances were amazing, but it never occurred to me that it's actually funny. And the audience taught me that. I never would have learned that if I had just been by myself, watching it by myself. I needed someone else to show me that and reveal that to me.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
That's
honestly.
Pretty cool.
It's cool, not because you realized it, but necessarily, but because it probably always was. But depending on your headspace that you're watching it in, I can imagine watching this 10 years ago and being in a very different headspace, right?
Yeah.
Than today, and watching it at home, right? Because maybe you didn't see it in the theater, right? But depending on where your life is as well, like being receptive to the idea that something could be funny. I don't know. I don't go into movies typically like ready to laugh unless
Same.
it's of I was just going to say a Vince Vaughn film, but this is not the episode to say that. You know what I mean? A Will Ferrell film.
Yeah.
If I go into a Will Ferrell film, I'm expecting to laugh. I'm like, even if it's a serious one, Stranger Than Fiction.
Yeah.
I'm still expecting to laugh. And you do. But like a Linklater film, I'm not really expecting that. So I'm not looking for it necessarily. I'm just taking what it's sending me, on its face, especially if I have no one around me who is also laughing.
Right.
Yeah. This is a great suggestion for going to the theater. You know what I mean?
It really
is, especially when the room is going to be packed, which I know nowadays is like, it's hit or miss. You could go to the theater and you've got dude A over here who's munching on everything and, super loud in quiet moments, not having no spatial awareness. You've got dude B over here who's like, talking on his phone and texting and stuff. And, but sometimes you have that experience when you go to like a curated moment that it sounds like you went to, where everyone is respectful, everyone knows what they're getting themselves into. And now you have the response of 200, 300 other people in the room. Yeah. And I can imagine that changes how you view it. That's pretty cool, man.
Really cool, man. Yeah. And I think you're dead on. Like, a movie can change depending on where you're at in your life. Your headspace totally determines, what you're experiencing at any given point in time. And speaking of headspace, Todd, what are we covering today?
Today, we are covering the Jennifer Lopez film, The Cell. So if you haven't seen this film, please pause the episode, go watch it, because we're going to spoil all the things.
Yeah, we're going to take a dive and look around into some of the cinematography, of course, realizing dream states and things that they played with there, as well as talk about some of the story and writing, maybe look at if there's a metaphor at play here, and what we can kind of parse from that, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. An FBI agent persuades a social worker to use a new experimental technology to enter the mind of a comatose serial killer in order to learn where he's hidden his last kidnap victim. It's directed by Tarsem Singh, screenplay by Mark Protosevich, cinematography by Paul Laufer, featuring Jennifer Lopez as Catherine, Vince Vaughn as Detective Peter Novak, Vincent D'Onofrio as Carl Stargher, and Colton James as Edward.
I want to reverse the feed, Miriam. Now more than ever.
We've been through this 100 times, Catherine. It's too risky.
Why not? What do we have to lose? When I did social work, it was always better when we took the kids out of their environment. Foster homes can be scary at first, but eventually they see that things can be different. Edward is like that right now. He's living in a world that is not healthy. Let's show him a different place.
All right. Let's say we do it your way. We reverse the feed and we bring Edward into your mind. Can you imagine his shock when he finds that he's been thrust into this whole other world?
I do it all the time.
Yes, but you're a willing participant, Catherine. You're aware of what's happening. Edward's in a coma. And besides, we don't know what effect it will have on you. I mean, you're already exhausted. Have you been sleeping?
Yes.
Any more nightmares?
No. No.
Good. Leave work here. Don't take it home in this.
Okay, Todd. So this is a 25-year-old film. I assume you came across it at some point in the past, probably right around the time it was released. And so I'm curious, like the good and the bad, like what holds up and how is it as a movie, especially a movie in contemporary times. And even maybe more especially as guys who have gone through 309 other movies and picked them apart.
Well, okay. Let me start off with the good. so the good for me is I think it looks beautiful. In the mind sequences, there's some. It really does look beautiful. I think sometimes it's like oversaturated, but I think that's the point. Hopefully, the oversaturation does kind of really affect their skin tones for me, though, a lot, which kind of is, I don't know if that's the point, to kind of like make it feel not real. Because then when we come out of the mind, those like mind scenes, it looks fine. It looks great. But it's just kind of overdone, but that's fine. Cause I think the sets that they build are just absolutely beautiful. I mean, and they're giant and they're grandiose. And a good example is, I don't know how to describe the scene, but the scene where, the detective is like woken up by her after he's been tortured. He's woken up by her, and they're in this kind of hallway, right? Where the kid eventually like shows himself, and then the grown-up version of him grabs the kid. So this hallway is just gorgeous, and there's this pool of water, and there's these stepping stones, and this is all stuff that they built. It's like practical and just really, really beautiful, and it looks kind of Egyptian, but with metals instead of just stone work. So it's kind of like an amalgamation of different eras, which is really creative and thoughtful, because it makes sense in somebody's mind if you've seen and familiar with, like, Egyptian hallways in the pyramids, but then also you live in 1995 or whenever this is, then you're going to know that different materials exist, like metals and stuff. And so in your mind, you would probably combine those things. So it feels like that. It feels like a combination of like a mess of things. And that's just one scene. So I really love it. I do like that we start off with Jennifer Lopez's character, and we kind of like immediately understand, or are brought to understand what she does. We start off in the mind of this kid, but we don't know that. We don't know where we are. And then we kind of learn that as she comes out. And keeping in mind that this is 25 years ago too, I think that was really thoughtful. And so we learn about her, and then we completely leave her, and we go and find this serial killer guy, and we meet the detective, and we see, and we're with them for a long time. Like we're not back and forth, which would take me out of that story. It's like, here's one story. Now that you understand that, here's another story. Now you understand that. And now we're going to bring them both together. And I don't know what the reviews were on this film, to be honest. And I really don't care, because I don't want to, I didn't want to like taint how I viewed it. I will say, I thought that Jennifer Lopez's performance was really good. I mean, yeah. It's hard to, her recent films have been very bad. And her recent acting has been very bad. So I wanted to go in here and with a completely blank slate, and just saying, I'm just going to watch this for what it is. And she does a really good job. I thought the clip that you showed was really strong. And that's a delicate moment that is really easy to mess up. And I think her acting today would have messed it up. She would have overacted and tried too hard. In this scene, I thought it was edited really well. I thought it was written really well too. We get some exposition, but not at the expense of exposition. It's her partner convincing her not to do this thing, right? And in the convincing, we learn about it. It's motivated exposition, which is beautiful, and I love it. I thought the setting was really great. They could have done this anywhere, in a hallway, outside, but instead they go into this little room, which is her recovery room essentially, and where she can see this nature, and they have this conversation. I think the directing is fantastic. Let's see. I
Here comes the bad.
Well, I don't want to. I really kind of don't want to shit on it because it's really easy to look at this in 2025 and like have a lot of oh, this is I expected this. I knew this was going to happen. Da, da, da. But remembering that this came out, when did this come out? The
2000.
90s? 2000. Yeah, that this came out in 2000. I mean, I really don't have a ton that I hated about it. I mean, there was, I think probably the thing that I really disliked the most was the casting of Vince Vaughn. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just see swingers the whole time. Yeah. I just want him to say baby like 1,000 times. And I don't buy him as a serious detective. I thought that if they cast somebody else, it would have been so much better. It would have been it basically would have been like a David Fincher film, to me, if they would have cast somebody else. You look at like Fincher films, or you look at Seven and you think, oh my God, and that's another film that's kind of like this, where you have, somebody who's killing people and everything, but it's so much heavier. And I think I don't think this would ever be as heavy as a film like Seven. Sorry. I don't think this would ever be as heavy as that. But because of the kind of futuristic and sci-fi ability to like go into a mind, right? I think that kind of like adds some levity to the story, just because that's so unbelievable, at least at this point. But with that said, I think that I mean, Vincent D'Onofrio, oh my God, is this guy. He
sends it. Yeah, he sends it all the way, man.
It is this guy. I mean, it's perfect casting, perfect role for him. He's just so insane, ever since Full Metal Jacket, I've just absolutely adored this guy. Like he can do an evil guy better than anybody. So he's fantastic. But I don't think it would ever be as heavy as Seven. However, I do think that it is not supposed to be. I think it's supposed to be otherworldly. It's supposed to be grandiose and very unbelievable. That said, I think that there's just this lightness that Vince brings that he can't help it. Because he's not like a how would you, I'm trying to think of another actor who I could compare him to, who could do something like this really seriously, but is a joker. And it's not like a Will Ferrell thing, because you always, like I mentioned earlier to you before this, like you always expect to laugh, or that there's this kind of lightheartedness with a Will Ferrell. However, he can do serious acting. I think that Vince can do serious acting, but in this role, I think it's just so close to Swingers and so close to like that kind of era. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I remember, when the film started and it goes through like starring Jennifer Lopez and blah, blah, blah. List people that said Vince Vaughn. And I thought, what? Vince Vaughn in this era? Why? Okay. All right. And then I just backed out. Yeah. So that, to me, that was like really the biggest thing for me. You cast somebody else besides Vince Vaughn, and all of a sudden this film goes from like a B or B plus to an A for me, because I don't think it's that far off in 2025 to be able to maybe do something like this, probably. Yeah. And how cool, and I think that they set up the story really well. The motivation is there. I think the ending is really weird. Honestly, her keeping the dog, no, sorry, very strange. That dog has seen some shit. And then that dog is messed up. And then just like coming to the house to see the house, but not going in and seeing the house, and then driving away and leaving. It's just kind of weird to me. Not saying it's not good. It's just weird. But I'll stop there, because I'm curious about what you think after seeing. When was the last time you saw this film?
It probably was around 2005, 2006. Like, you know,
Okay,
a good 20
so
years.
20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I can imagine her trying to leave for work every day and the dog pretending to be dead behind the car.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, we don't do that anymore.
But that goes to show you how good Vincent D'Onofrio is.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't keep his dog.
Right.
That's how good his character is. You know?
I completely agree about Vince Vaughn's casting. That was my big resounding thought. I was like, man, it really is a different film with someone else there that you believe is a detective, or he plays, it's way off. It's like he's playing it too big and bossy, and he's like, I'm a detective. And it's just like, you know, really competent detectives don't feel that need to, you know, shout at people obvious things like, let's get this. We don't want to be waiting on the reports. Like, it's just like, yeah, no shit. We all do this for a living, bro. Like,
and when we first meet him, he's by the river and he's standing on a rock,
it's just,
or something like that, like above everyone.
Come on.
I was like,
Is the river usually this low? Like, just everything in his delivery just feels forced and contrived, and it's like very TV. It's not, you know, filmic. It's very TV, dramatic, and it's just like, come on, you know, put down the Law and Order, and like, let's be adults here. But 7. This feels like the writer, Mark Protosevich, his name, is pulling from like. Is pulling from like 7 and Silence of the Lambs, and maybe a little bit of Jacob's Ladder, like just kind of swirling all these kind of elements together and saying, what can we play with in this park now that also gives us some crazy, you know, visual elements. And I remember watching this in theater, actually, whenever it came out. You had me at weird shit on the screen. Like, okay, I'm in. And it's a ride, but same, man. You kind of get through the film, and the ending is a little strange, and I'll enhance the strangeness even more whenever I kind of dive into what I think the metaphors are trying to play with here. But then it also just feels, I don't know, missing. It's like there's another gear missing. And I think having a better actor, or at least a more appropriate actor, for Detective Peter Novak probably adds a little bit more weight that I think is missing. There's some kind of weight, that just doesn't feel right. But I think there's also some story dynamic stuff that is also, there's the layers that I think he's kind of reaching for, that he's just missing, because some of the like detective work feels a little boilerplate, and it doesn't feel lived in and doesn't feel quite real enough. And it's like, I get why we're going through some of these motions, but they do feel like we're just going through the motions. Like, I don't feel like he ever earns finding the guy in a way that is that makes sense. And even at the end, finding the last victim, that doesn't feel quite earned either. Like, all the tools that he needed to find her, he already had before he went under, and they pulled the mental images from the guys. Like, all the pieces were there. If you weren't such a dipshit, I feel like you should have already found them. And yeah, so there's just some deeper levels on the detective side. I think everything happening in the mind is really cool and really interesting and filled with significance. And everything happening outside of the mind is what's falling apart. Like, especially around the case itself, all the case study, all the detective work feels just, I don't know, way too humdrum. All the serial killer stuff, apart from D'Onofrio's performance, feels very humdrum. And then once you get into his head state, and all the stuff between Catherine and Carl Stargher is all really good and rich. And so, yeah, it needed another pass from either another writer or better notes from the producers and from Tarsem Singh. I don't know. There was just, I think Tarsem read the script and said, I can kill the visuals on this. And he does. Like, it's just gorgeous. The locations, the production design that you're talking about, the makeup and wardrobe. Oh my God. Like, this is award-winning stuff. And yet all the other stuff is just like, the story beats just need reworking, or at least another layer of thought that you can dive into. But that's kind of what I felt watching this the first time as a teenager, and also what I still feel now as a full-grown adult filmmaker. Like, I had the exact same feelings of, that was really cool looking, but also, yeah, okay, like, it's fine. But yeah, I'll dive a little bit into, like, I'll run through some cinematography and jump in, because I think you're going to have a lot of fun add-ons when it comes to, like, especially the visuals. But what a great job with the dream states. I don't know what else to call it. Like, it's not technically a dream, but it is dreamlike. And to a large degree, I think, not to invoke too many other films here, I think this is what people were wanting when they saw Inception. Now, I think they were kind of wrong for wanting that, based on what Inception is actually trying to be. But this is just, when you're getting inside someone's head, this is what a dream feels like. This is what being inside a mind feels like in so many ways. All the qualities are there. It's super disorienting. And even whenever it feels like you understand, there's also some disorienting elements. Like that opening scene, we see her traveling right to left across the desert. And it's this beautiful wide vista. And she's in this gorgeous, like, gown or dress. And it feels inappropriate because of the setting, but also how, like, her skin is just lush. She's not sweaty. She's not uncomfortable. Like, she feels completely comfortable, and looks amazing. And then, as that progresses, she gets on a horse. She's galloping across the desert. And it's just combined with this, music that feels like, I don't know, off. Like, for some reason, what we're seeing, this music it's beautiful and it's interesting, but it's also like the energy feels off compared to what we're seeing. Like, it's heightening everything. And so it's just this really great kind of accumulation of all these elements. And then as she keeps going through looking for something, suddenly she's going from left to right and then back to right to left. Like, she feels lost until this mirror reflection kind of hits her. And then she finds Edward, right? And whenever she comes across him, it's in this valley, and the dialogue is kind of hazy and echoey, right? And then sometimes the visuals move into the slow motion. Like, all these elements are colliding into this. It feels off. We don't know why we're here and what's happening. And then suddenly, I love that she's talking to this little kid in this, desert, and saying, I thought we were going to go, sailing today. And he looks over her shoulder, and she looks back, and we reveal this old rusted ship. And she's like, I don't think that's appropriate for sailing today. And he shows her this other thing, and it's just kind of moving through all these weird, like, where'd that ship come from? Which is a great, like, I think that's all done in camera. I don't think that's composited. And the reason I think that's significant is they had to go to a completely different desert to get that shot. Mm-hmm. And you have to match it. She has to look the exact same. The sky has to look the same. And so you got to find the right day for this to take place. And you got to match the camera movement. And it's just beautiful because it's seamless. And then we cut back into real time within the desert. Like, that's another layer of effort that not everyone wants to go through. They don't do it today. Like, we're talking 25 years still later. You know what? No one does that today anymore. Like, how often do you think they say, well, we could composite this, or we could just shoot it in the green screen, or we could go travel, move a whole team to a completely different country and get this shot? No, we're not going to do that. Like, they did that. That's dope. And they could have green screened that back in 2000. I mean, this was a year after The Matrix came out. Like, don't tell me they didn't have the wherewithal of doing that kind of thing. Of course they did. But Tarsem is not that kind of director, which we will definitely see when we get to next week's episode. Right. And so very cool effort, and sparing no thought about how can we maximize the viewer's feeling of moving through these environments. Same thing later, a few sequences later, we get into Catherine's nightmare in that scene that we played on top of all the other things you mentioned. But the other little element that they set up is she's lying to her team leader. Like the woman she's talking to, I should have wrote it down. But she's the inventor of all that technology. And Catherine is just more suited to help Edward. Due to her background as a social worker and connecting with kids, blah, blah, blah. But the thing that her team leader is asking her is, are you still having nightmares? She's like, no. And with a look, great acting. With a look, she doubles down. Are you serious? She's like, no, seriously. I'm not having nightmares. Fast forward, a scene later, she's walking around in their apartment, which we'll come back to. And she's falling asleep. She's high. She's trying to unwind. She's struggling to do that, and she's high and she's watching Fantastic Planet, which under normal circumstances, great way to get high and unwind with this trippy psychedelic, animation from the 70s. Instead, she enters into a nightmare seamlessly. And I love that transition of going from her bed with the pillow into the desert and into Edward.
So cool.
God. Very few people do that good of a job anymore. I think there's moments where Gareth Edwards kills it. I would have to go through Nolan stuff, but he's probably done one or two transitions that good. But that is just seamless because the blankets transition into the desert. And it's probably more appropriate to say he made the desert look like blankets. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that it looked like to me, it's really thought out that he uses shadow as transitions. So, so if you wait till late in the day where the sun is low in the sky, it's going to cast a longer shadow on the dunes. And so you can set that up with a blanket a very similar way by just, a low light source, which is the TV. She's watching the TV, so it's motivated, right? And so and the TV is low, so we're seeing it cast a long shadow on the dunes of the blanket, and you can use that as a transition. That's, you could just cut or fade, do a fade or something, but that's not necessarily interesting and motivated. This is super motivated. And I saw it coming. As the camera started panning down on the blanket, I thought, oh, that kind of looks like he's going to transition into the desert back again, and he does. It's great. I expected it as I saw it happening, and it paid off for sure.
Spades. God, that's cool. Because it's very disorienting, and I love setting it up with the a massive wide angle macro lens so that you have a really deep depth of field. The blank or the pillow that she's holding in her lap has that hand and the palm, and we're moving straight over that into the blanket that suddenly you realize with the wind blowing across the desert, suddenly what? And it's so magically disorienting. That's cool. But great use overall of disorienting language, right? Camera moves. So when she first moves into Carl's dreams or into his mind, the first thing she sees is that baptism scene. And that's one giant camera move. And it's so cool because it starts underwater and it rotates around the entire scene until it goes back underwater. And so we see this, very relevant moment from his life. And that's the first thing that she sees. And we go all the way back until we're underwater, and then we keep moving until we see feet of someone standing there, and then we keep moving until we see that those feet are trapped in an aquarium in this whole new scene. Melting my brain, because then we keep moving up until the camera suddenly starts rotating to reveal that we were actually sideways the whole time, and that she's waking up disoriented in this mind, in this crazy trap of a mental hellscape. Like, it's just a beautiful camera move that really feels like you're in a space where anything can happen, where you don't understand which way is up. And it's motivated by the story and by her mental state, and just executed far better than most filmmakers working today. Like, it's just unbelievable. And it continues. Like, even in her second, dream, same thing happens. She, that's such a great, because now Carl is aware of her, and it's like he sets a trap for the very next time she comes back. And whenever she wakes up, it's playing with her head, because she doesn't know that she's the one caught off guard, because she thinks it didn't work and she's not under, only to find out that she is under. And I love how he's changing environments just a little bit. Like, the room is like 30 or 40% bigger than it's supposed to be, and suddenly she's smaller. And that feeling of insignificance and I'm out of place, and the world, I can't compete with this world. Like, it's just shrinking her down, and it's playing with kind of the Hitchcock rule of things larger in frame are more significant. And by making her smaller, like, her power has dwindled. And
I wonder how they did that, if they did it practically, like Lord of the Rings style, or if they did it, like composite. I don't know, but it was funny because I just watched a video on how they did that in Lord of the Rings, and how amazingly practical forced perspective they used.
I bet they built the set, because I love that she grabs the cart and like pushes it out of the way, and that establishes scale, and like, because later in that sequence, same thing happens where she gets to young Carl's house as a boy, and the door is bigger. It's way too big, but it's not like hilariously big. It's just awkwardly bigger. And she's starting, and I think it's reflecting a lot of her empathy and what she's dealing with. That's the trap of her. And so let's talk about some of the metaphor and symbolism that I think the writer's trying to get at, which is, before that, so story and writing, before that, let's talk about Catherine at home, right? She's half undressed, right? She goes home from that meeting, that clip that we played. She goes home, and she's standing at the fridge, half undressed, right? She can't really leave work behind. She's trying, right? She's got her pants off. She's trying to get comfortable, but she still has her work blouse on. And she's smoking a joint. She's reviewing all of Edward's information, which has got this really unhealthy, like, it's on a cork board in front of her, news clippings, and like, she is struggling. And she's trying to fall asleep, and she needs to get high to do that. She has that nightmare that Edward is being overrun by Maculok. And that's really, really revealing in a lot of ways. And then, so I get why you do that, but it also doesn't hurt to have Jennifer Lopez walking around in her panties. Like, if you're going to have something visually interesting happening that's also revealing of character, you can do worse things than put that on screen. Especially at the high. I mean, even now, like in her 50s, she is just ridiculous. It didn't hurt Hustlers, right, at all to have her. And so, very great use of just, I guess, your assets, if you will, but also storytelling, because it actually is motivating. I think most people watching this are thinking the exact opposite of, like, you just wanted to put Jennifer Lopez in her panties, when in reality, like, having her there is actually revealing of her character and what she's struggling with within the story itself. And so it's a little bit of both, but it's motivated. It's not just there for titillation. or buttylation. And so the other aspect that I think that's leading into that conversation that she has with her boss, as well as her at home, is maybe this metaphor about social workers helping troubled kids. Now, what degree? This is where I think it gets a little dicey of, I don't know, and this is not the first time we've run into this with this writer. He's the same writer behind I Am Legend, or at least the adaptation of the book of I Am Legend. And we ran into some like, what's really being said here, kind of thoughts. And that's an interesting episode to go back and listen to. But here, I'm not sure if it's a commentary about adopting, like social workers adopting, or is it just about helping kids? I don't know. There's a ton of water imagery that they're playing with here, and that is very intentional. Although it's not clear to what degree that it's being used and in what ways that it's supposed to mean something. Because she says they're comforted by the feeling of weightlessness. She's describing to the detective, Peter, that there's a reason why we do what we do with levitating, us above, and we're not laying down, we're being levitated. And it's because they're comforted by the feeling of weightlessness, like they're floating in water. So she's drawing this comparison of being, levitated like that, suspended to water and being in water. And then you have to also think about all the water imagery being used throughout the film. Edward, her little boy that she's been trying to help, for the last year and a half, he lives in a desert and he refuses to get on the water. She's trying to get him there, and he won't go there, and he's trapped by Mokulok, right? Mokulok is the boogeyman. Mokulok likes me where I am. He doesn't want me to move out of this dry, barren place. And so maybe the water is kind of this representation of kids who are struggling, who needs the water. Of course, is the essence of life. We are made and composed of water. We need it to survive. And when you put these kids into these dry, barren places, as a social worker, you're looking at them and trying to say, I'm trying to give you something that you need, which is water, which is life. And so I think there's this very strong imagery about water. And then you think about Carl, who drowns his victims in a tank. And it's like he is a really terrible version of what he needs himself. Like he's giving his victims everything he doesn't have. And if you think about the tank itself is in this facility surrounded by dry land. And so they're playing a lot with this water imagery. And then they go even further with this idea of what Carl has is called Wayland's infraction. And the way you spell Wayland is like a whale. Whalen, right? So he's still playing with this idea of water, and that it's a type of schizophrenia, and it's a fabricated disease. There is no such thing as Wayland's. It's just a furthering of the metaphor that he's trying to play with. And she says, or the doctor says, normal psychotropics don't work. This is caused by a virus that occurs in utero, and it's triggered by trauma. In other words, there's nothing this kid could have done to stop this from happening. It's not his fault that he had this thing in him that now gets triggered by trauma. And this is the way a lot of schizophrenia works. It's something that's just in there. And then if the wrong person goes through the wrong things, or you go through, traumatic events, that's one way. It's not like the way necessarily. There's a lot of ways from what I understand about schizophrenia. And in talking to doctors, this is one weird thing that I've studied to some degree and talked to doctors and psychiatrists. And these are some of the things that they were talking about. And I know 0.5% of 0.5% of any of this. So this is, again, just the minimal stuff that I've learned, working on this one project with, a lot of psychologists and patients and schizophrenic people who have come through episodes and breaks and to the other side. And these are some of the things that, I think I've learned, I should say. Anyway, and so he's playing in this territory of saying, Carl went through something, and he got broken, and now he's at a place where he's struggling to come back from. And there's only one way to do anything about it, which is to send in someone into his brain. And so here we are in that first scene that she sees of him being baptized, right? She floats up and over it and witnesses this traumatic moment in his life. And it's like his dad, his caretaker, is the one his version of love is to drown him in it and is to abuse him with it. Like, this is the one person that's supposed to be giving him water in his life and his sustenance. And he's completely, doing it in an abusive way. And therefore, Carl is retracting. He's getting away from the water. He himself is saying this is not a safe place to interact with anybody. And that triggers all kinds of issues with him, right? And then we move through that scene whenever she's going through his mind into like blood splashing in the water and dogs shaking off bloody water in the bathroom. And so they just kind of keep playing in a million ways. Like if you watch this movie and just think about water, you'll see it just again and again and again. Like Peter, whenever he gets into the dream, right? He wakes up in this field, this dry, deserted like garden with these three women who have they're locked up, looking up to the sky with their mouths open. And they look completely dehydrated, and they're just looking for water, one drop, kind of element to their whole being. And so they just kind of keep playing with that. But I think Peter is a little bit at odds with her perspective, Catherine, the social worker, because he says, I believe a child can experience 100 times the abuse Carl did and still grow up never hurting anyone. And she asked him, you're sure of that? And he said, yes, I am. And so he's right. I mean, he's not wrong. People go through all kinds of terrible, terrible things in childhood and maybe even come out, more empathetic, having experienced some of those things that they did. But we're all not the same people. And that's where her specialty comes in. Because I think as a cop, as someone who was a prosecutor and is now a detective, he doesn't think it's his job to try to help anybody. His job is to just see what they do and who they are and the results of who they are and put them behind bars and deal with it. And she doesn't see her job that way. And that's really emphasized at the end whenever he gets everything he needs and he leaves. He's done with Carl. He's his focus now is on helping the victim. And she goes back to try, because one, she made a promise to Innocent, that childlike version of Carl that still exists in his head. She goes back in there to help him, right? When everyone else is given up, and in fact, she has to kind of lock herself in there to get that access because everyone else is ready to just be done with them, and she's not. She's going back in to do whatever she can. And this is where it gets a little dicey because she goes back in, and the end result of that is two things. One, she pulls him into her world. She does the thing that she says in that clip about, you need to take a kid out of his bad environment and bring him into something good. And there's a resistance within the system, that's saying you can't do that. It's not healthy. This is where I'm not sure if this is about adopting or, being open as a psychologist or social worker and being vulnerable to your patients. I don't know, because the end result is she learns that she can help more people by opening up. And that's what we see at the very end with, Edward. She's meshing their worlds together. We're still kind of in his desert, but she's giving him an access to water on the horizon, right? That cloth that's just kind of flowing, that blue thing in the desert now. And so there's that element, and that's really cool to see that. But then the other weird thing is she kills Carl, and that was her version of setting him free. And so that's a bit of a muddy message, because the reason she does that is Carl's kind of asking for it. It's like it's too late for him. And he tells that story about the way he killed that bird. He found this wounded bird and he knew what his dad would do to it. So before his dad could hurt the bird any further, he takes it into a tub and drowns it. And so that's a very strange use of the water symbol. Because now, as a healthy person, she's using water to take her patient out. And so that's just not super clear. And maybe that's the ultimate cell that we're talking about, is some people just need to be pulled out of society and placed into a place where they can't hurt other people until they get better, or maybe they never get better, and therefore they have to stay in their cell. And it's for everyone's, best interest. I don't know. It's a little messy. I don't think they clean that up quite enough to put the finishing bones on that plate there. But then you also have that element of her losing her mind, because she gets into his brain and she starts to empathize too much with Carl's traumatic past. And we see it slowly eat her up, right? From the beginning, she's disoriented and she's seeing what he's dealing with, and she's trapped in his closet and she feels her feet in water, but it's now being kind of surrounded by eels. And if you watch that whole sequence, more and more and more, she's just, feeling really, really awful for Carl, and she kind of loses her perspective. And that's that whole element of, you do need some kind of boundaries to protect yourself. As a social worker, as a psychologist, you need some healthy boundaries. Because at the end of the day, the airplane goes tail up, you need to put your mask on first before you help your kids. That's that kind of element. I don't know. I think there's some really rich stuff that they're getting into. It's not super clean, which isn't bad necessarily, but I don't know. What do you make of all that, man?
Yeah, I think you're right that it is making this social statement, and I think it's an interesting question of do you think, when she asks him, do you think basically he says that it's the kid had a choice to become this or not become this. And I don't know, I think depending on the day, some people might think yes, some people might think no. But yeah, I think it's also important to show what the kid goes through, which they do painfully. When the kid locks her in the closet and she has to watch while he gets punished by his terrible father. And it's you brought up an interesting moment too when he tells her about him killing the bird. And I think that is a really important moment in this discussion, because he chooses violence. The kid has to choose violence because of his father, because to save this bird from what he would deem a worse death, he kills this thing. That is because of his father. Because of his father, he started killing animals. And I think that it goes without saying, a lot of, at least in my, if you want to call it research, people who, terrible, who do terrible things, a gateway to that is violence against animals. So now we have this thing, this kid feels that he's forced to kill an animal, which is a gateway to killing people because of his father. Now, maybe if that didn't happen, if he didn't kill this bird, maybe he would have had the strength to not become this terrible serial killer, awful person when he grows up. But because at a young age, he had to do this terrible thing, which, is you and I would never do. But not only do it, but do it because of his father. Like, I really feel like that was a catalyst for him to become this terrible thing. And it's just a passing kind of moment where he's having this conversation with her at the bathtub next to that dead girl, and we get a little bit of exposition, and then that version of him is gone. Like, we never see that version of him ever again. Then he's that's the first time she's in his mind, and then we see the grandiose version of him, whatever. So we get a little bit of that. I think the deeper you go into conversations about this, the more interesting the conversation is, which is a cool aspect of a movie. Now, when it comes to the execution of it, yes, I think there's holes and everything, but it's still, I think today, a very important conversation that I don't think that we have a lot. I mean, I think that the kid version, her response to the child version of him in his mind is beautiful. There is no fear of this kid, there's she sees the kid as an innocent being, which is separate from the awful, murdering, terrible version of him when he's older. And she always welcomes that to her own detriment. And she's always searching him out. And when she sees him, she's always welcoming him and touching him and hugging him and trying to win his affection or win his trust. And I think that that's really, really beautiful and easy to forget that all of these terrible people were once an innocent child that had no idea about what the world was, and were taught about what the world was probably by terrible people. And I can't really think of like another film, at least off the top of my head, that does that kind of thing so forgivingly. Like, we find this kid, we know who this kid is. This kid is, the young Hitler. This kid,
Right.
Who we all say, if I go back and I find baby Hitler, gone. But like, she welcomes baby Hitler in and to the point where, she's willing to get lost for him. And I think it's just so beautiful. And she does it really, really, really well. I mean, out of all the performances I've seen of Jennifer Lopez, this is definitely one of my favorites. I mean, I can't think of another one that I like better, but probably because I don't go back and rewatch Jennifer Lopez films very often. But I just think that it's very real, and touching and relatable, and I would hope that if I were in a crazy situation like that I would be able to do that same thing, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Which raises a really tough question for me, is like, can you separate the individual from the innocent child version of them? And then also identifying when I feel like I've failed and I've done things wrong in my life, or I've like yelled at my kids or something like that, remembering that I have a child version of myself too, and being like forgiving of my own version of my child self. It's weird. I literally thought about that yesterday at the gym, of like, there's a child in me, that's still there, like I have a version of that I could actually think about and go back and talk to. And you've seen that in films, and you've seen that, and that exists, but you don't really I never really sat down and thought of that and like imagined him, conjured him up. And it was really beautiful. So I think this is really timely to watch this film because of that.
That's so cool. Everything you just said is really, really cool. I think even the conversation that you're talking about, like being able to empathize enough, like whenever I think about, generally in society, we talk about how teachers are underpaid and overworked, but man, social workers, like we don't talk about social workers.
We don't
at all. They are lost in our society, and God, they're important. Like, they are the front lines to kids going through the hardest times of their lives, the ones who are really struggling to figure stuff out. And, I've seen plenty of adults who've gone through that. But I don't run into that many social workers. Overworked, underpaid. I mean, oh my God. But it's really, I love what you're saying. Like, it's an exercise in empathy. Like, can you actually see someone who's done horrible things and still try to see if there's someone in there worth redeeming? That's hard. And depending on who and the what, and maybe not. But I love, and that's a really good reason to cast a woman in this role. Not just Jennifer Lopez, but like Stargher is killing and abusing women. So to have the one person who's trying to save him also be a woman is a really extra layer of empathy that is being needed. And I think they could do a better job of touching on that, because they really just leave that. They never bring up that aspect of, she is not offended at all at the idea of, and someone else in the room should have brought up how, like, this doesn't bother you, that, blah, blah, blah. Like, that should have been a button to push of, like, he's killing women. Don't you care about that? Like, I don't know, something that gives her an opportunity to add in another layer of empathy as a woman looking at other women who have had their lives destroyed by this man, because that completely exists in this story, even if not directly addressed, because she becomes one of them. In his mind, she becomes just another one of the women that he's stolen. And so it just would have been great to, call that out in some form or fashion.
Good point.
Good
point. Yeah, because it's not like she's not doll-like, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not like she's not his type.
Right.
So I was expecting some kind of like, from him, seeing her for the first time, like, what are you doing here? I mean, he does say, what are you doing here? Basically, he literally said that. But, I don't know. Maybe he doesn't need to say anything, because he does make her his own by, with the collar later on.
The collar, he puts
so
a
he
mask
doesn't need
on
to
her.
call it out.
Yeah.
But I did expect a little bit more from that. Yeah, that was interesting.
God, yeah. So I think this is one of those movies that would be almost perfect for a remake. Like, there's a lot you can do with the story. What you're going to struggle with is matching the visuals. Like, that's your task. That's your real task. Like, leveling this whole thing up. And in fact, you could bring Jennifer Lopez back. You could make a sequel or a spiritual part 2, even if you just remade this same exact story and use her again. I would love to see that. I completely agree. This is probably my favorite performance from her. It is tender. It is very thoughtful. It's compassionate, and she does a wonderful job. I'd love to see her take another crack at it with maybe just a tighter script and a more layered script. And even Tarsem Singh could probably come back and direct it. Like, this is ripe. This would kill audiences today if given this extra layer.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It's hard to find an old classic that you're like, that should be a new one. They should redo that.
Well, I think that you're spot on. I don't know that I would bring Jennifer Lopez back nowadays, fair. Just because, it might be a fair argument. But I think that not only have visuals gotten worse in a lot of ways, but practically, they're done really, really well now. And I think so. If you did this again, but you stuck to we're going to try to do this as much practically as possible, that would be really interesting. You have brand new characters, tell the exact same story, honestly, like just redo it, with new characters, recast Vince Vaughn's character, and then, I think that we've learned a lot in filmmaking through, like Fincher and stuff, like moving forward. And that I think some decisions might be a little bit different, but also it could be a little bit less on the nose, even less on the nose, right? I don't think this film is on the nose at all. Yeah. I think it's really, really well done, but I think that it could benefit from what we've learned in the last 25 years of what to do and what not to do. Now, at the same time, if I were to say, let's remake this, I would probably want to wait another 5 years for people to remember what making films was like before the pandemic. Because I feel like, and I've said this before, how do I put this? It's easy to say we got lazy. I don't think that we got lazy. I think that we did what we had to do to make movies during a very difficult time. And that is carrying over like out of the pandemic. Whatever that means, I don't have an answer for, but I just, it's different now. And I think that it's coming back. I think that filmmaking is, pre-pandemic filmmaking is coming back, but I think we still need a few more years. So if it's this in like 5 years, if this were to be remade, I think it would be fantastic. I completely agree.
Nice.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I would be there in a second.
In a second, bro. Yeah. And maybe you can add 20, 30 minutes of runtime on in order to make all the investigative work a little bit more satisfying, and or I don't know, chop off 30 minutes. Or 20 minutes. I don't know the right mix here. But I think we can layer in some of these elements a bit stronger. And yeah, still give it a thrilling ride, because visually, my God, I mean, very few films touch this. And yeah, anyway.
And it was good to see Dean Norris, dude, as a cop,
right? And a young Peter Sarsgaard, by the way.
Yeah, right.
What the hell?
Exactly. It was like, what is going on?
And in fact,
so cool.
You could recast the detective as Peter Sarsgaard. That's the right guy for the job.
That's true. That's true.
He is. They had it. They had it there the whole time. Oh, so good. Nice.
Oh,
well, that's all I got, man.
Nice.
What are you going to recommend this week?
Okay. Let me pull it up. I had it here. Where is it? Okay, cool. I'm going to recommend another J-Lo film, because why not? We're going on the J-Lo train. I'm going to recommend Out of Sight, which I have not seen in a long time, but I remember really, really enjoying it, really loving it. It's got George Clooney and Ving Rhames, Don Cheadle in it, and Peter Soderbergh film. Very good.
Yeah, Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah.
God, that
what
guy.
Did I say? Did I say Peter Soderbergh?
You said Peter. I think you had Peter Novak in front of you.
I think so. Yeah. Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah. Oh,
Peter's
man.
his long lost cousin on his mother's side.
Great recommendation. Soderbergh, man, is prolific. That guy just keeps making things. He edits his own projects. There's not a ton of directors who do that. And he's one of a crop full. And I love him for that. I love that he keeps experimenting with the art form and is not afraid to take risks. If you haven't seen Presence, that's an interesting, thought-provoking film. So good. Great recommendation. I'm going to recommend a new show on HBO. It's called The Pitt. And someone, Key, friend of the show, said, "Hey, have you checked this out?" And I was like, "No, I debated. It just wasn't catching my attention." And she's like, "Okay, I was just asking." I was like, "Should I?" She's like, "I don't know. I watched it. Now, if you had, I was going to talk about it." And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll watch it." And first episode, I was like, "Okay, that was okay." Second episode, I was like, "That's pretty good." And it's a show set in an emergency room, and it's hour by hour. So it's kind of a 24 method of we're going to spend 15 hours in the emergency room, and we're going to go 1 hour at a time. And that adds a whole other layer of drama. And allows some of these stories to really breathe, and also give you a very realistic feeling of what it's like to be in a trauma, room. God,
they're saying that it's one of the most accurate depictions of an emergency room ever made.
I believe it. It's thrilling and beautiful, and the camera work, because when you start saying we're going to be in like one room effectively, second to second, and tying all these shots together, dude, it's some pretty masterful like writing and camera work. And the performances, Noah Weil, I've never heard of this guy. I thought he was a fabricated actor. And He's amazing. This guy is
amazing.
Have you watched this yet?
Yeah. I'm all caught up.
Are you really?
I watch it every week. Yeah. I have my opinions, but I've seen him in other stuff. But he is the show. He's absolutely fantastic.
The show. I started watching it like Friday night, and I'm up to date now. So this is Sunday morning, so I blew right through it. And so I'm ready for the next 9 episodes. So yeah, I recommend that. It's interesting and worth watching if nothing else. Very cool. Stay tuned for next week. We're going to take a look at another Tarsem Singh film. And this one is The Fall. It's I think came out in 2006. And you want to talk about visual films? This is the granddaddy Mac Daddy of them all. So check that out. And I don't know if you like anything else, you will like the visuals in this film. He shot this in 26 different countries. And so if you look at this and you're not wowed, this isn't the show for you.
Yeah.
But that aside, I don't know. We'll see what kind of story we're working with and if it holds up or whatever. I'm excited about that. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, drop us a review, leave us a note. Something you want us to talk about, kind of things you want us to talk about, let us know. If you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/thecell.
And our quote of the day is from Jean Piaget, a Swiss child psychologist. The goal of education is not to increase the amount of knowledge, but to create the possibilities for a child to invent and discover. Oh my gosh, that is so good. That is so good. And it's so interesting to me right now because we are going through, my wife and I are going through this difficult point with our son and school. And my wife isn't a lifelong educator. She, for those of you who don't know, she has been teaching for nearly 20 years. She's assistant dean of a school out here in the Bay Area. And she's very knowledgeable about this kind of thing. And so I learned so much from her all the time, just talking about, what my son is going through. And while she has, the utmost respect and care and love and devotion for all of the teachers, at the same time, the system itself is completely broken in our country. And she will be the first to say it. It's not, I think she would love and completely agree with something like this. Like, it doesn't matter if I know how to do the square root of pi. The point is not that. The point is, if I want to learn about that, it will unlock doors for me to be able to go into engineering or send a man to Mars or think, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it is more important about the process of learning to develop possibility than it is about making sure a child knows how to do 4 times 5. It's not about whether my daughter knows how to do 4 times 5. It's about what does that mean for her in her life that she knows how to do that like that.
Yeah.
That's the thing. This is just a beautiful quote. I don't know where you found it.
I was looking up, I was like, I want to hear from a psychologist. And so I started just looking up child psychologists. And this was one of the top hits because he was born in 1896 and passed in 1980. And so it sounds like he's a very formative, person in the field of child psychology. And I saw that quote and I kept looking through a bunch of his other quotes. And if you just look through this guy, things he has to say, they're all amazing. But this one really just stuck because I love that. The goal of education is not to increase the amount of knowledge, but to create the possibilities for a child to invent and discover. And to me, that just struck home, not just as an idea, but also for this film. When you're thinking about what Catherine is trying to do, she's trying to create a space for those kids to open up and look for things. She can't just tell them what they need. Answers aren't like that. Like when it comes to helping people in psychology, you can't just say, oh, here's the answer. Like they need to be able to find the answer for themselves. And our job as friends and, family and loved ones is to create space for people to open up and discover those things for themselves. Because you can, put water in front of them, but if they don't want to get in it, then you're fighting. That's not going to help. Like, the point isn't to fight. It's not to struggle, it's to accept and, show possibilities. And I love that idea of education as just this route, this avenue to allow kids to find and discover the world. Otherwise, you're just trapping them in a desk and feeding them, force feeding all this data. And that's not what the world is. The world isn't just data. It's an experience. That's why we're human. We're here to experience things. And if you strip that away, then you're really just wanting robots, and that's different species.
Yes, 100%. And I think that should be its own episode, honestly, talk about education, because it's a deep one. I fully believe that we are just building a workforce. That's literally all we're doing. And it's a tragedy. I'm part of that. I mean, I grew up in that era of that, we both did.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway.
Nice.
Fantastic. Love this episode, man. Great job. Great insights.
Surprisingly good episode, I think.
I know, right? I had no idea coming into this.
I didn't either.
It was almost like I didn't even know what to say.
I know.
But whatever. I think
I was stressing because I was like,
stuff.
I took 1,000 notes and I got nothing to say. And so I just started watching it again with the extra time. And I was like, oh, okay. I think Todd will have a lot of cool things to say about this. So I just started throwing shit at the wall.
And it stuck. Well, hopefully you guys all enjoyed this too. Please subscribe, review us wherever you get your podcasts. It all matters, and it all helps the channel, helps the podcast itself. Share us with your friends. If there's a film that you'd like to see us pick apart, please share it with us. Maybe one day we will cover it. Until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.